everyone, I hope you're doing well. So last year I decided that I was going to take on a pretty big project. I decided that I was going to make my own fursuit. I had never made one before, I had no prior experience of making a fursuit, but I had Fursuit's fox-based tutorial and hand paw tutorial, so how hard could it be? It was challenging, to say the least. Before we start, I want to make it very clear, this is not a tutorial. I will not be telling you how to make a fursuit, nor will I be showing Fursuit's tutorials. You can purchase them for yourself on their Etsy. Every video tutorial I used will be linked in the description below. I don't have a whole lot of documentation of the process, but I'll show what I do have here on screen while I ramble on about it. With all of that being said, let's go ahead and get into the first part. So, to start off, I had to make the head base. I got my 1-inch thick foam from Walmart for the head, and because my fiance Travis works for a company that makes EVA foam, I was able to get some for free from there. Shaping and carving the head base was really easy with the tutorial from Fursuit. I don't really have a whole lot to say about this part because it really was really easy. The only bad part was all of the frickin' foam that was all over the floor after I was finished, but the cleanup process wasn't too terrible, honestly. The next part I worked on was the tail. Again, this part was pretty simple as well. I followed Nefertiti's Super Motion Tail tutorial. I ended up not going fully through with the Super Motion Tail, but I have enough fur left over, I might end up giving it another go. My only issue with making the tail, and this was totally my fault, my mistake, I got the fur direction wrong. When you're making the tail, typically you want the fur to run down to the tip of the tail because that's how normal tails work. If you look at your dog's tail, you'll notice that the fur runs down to the tip of the tail. I messed up and it's going backwards, so it's all running up to the base of the tail. When I tell you I feel so embarrassed and cringe every time I look at my tail, I mean it. It's so embarrassing. I feel so bad that I got it wrong, which is just another reason why I want to make a new tail. All in all, making the tail is really easy. Just learn from my mistakes. Make sure you get the fur direction right. So, I was really anxious and hesitant to start furring the head base. I ended up putting off the process for months because I was so worried I would mess it up and ruin it or not like the suit at the end of it all. Eventually, what ended up giving me the kick in the pants I needed to do the work was actually a TikTok I saw. I didn't save it, unfortunately, so I can't tell you which one it was, but all I remember from it was the quote, "Making a fursuit isn't as hard as you think." At that moment, I took a deep breath and started working on patterning and furring. This process was the toughest for me. I was already putting myself at a handicap by deciding to hand sew the entire thing. I did that for the tail too, by the way, and the hand paws. But I was really going in blind. I had to watch several tutorials by Sky High Studios to really understand how to do this properly. If you look at my completed fursuit head, you can see that I've really struggled with the ears. It's the one part of the suit I'm the most self-conscious about because I know it looks rough. I even had to pattern the head multiple times just to make sure I got everything right. All in all, I did my best with the head, and even though it was by far the most difficult part, and it's not perfect, I'm pretty satisfied with how it turned out. The hand paws were the last thing I was making for the fursuit. I already had a pair of feet paws that I got from Made For You at FWA 2019 that I could just reuse for this partial. I wasn't using them for any other fursuit, so I wouldn't have to go through that process. The hand paws were kind of easy. After working on other parts of the fursuit, I was getting pretty comfortable with hand sewing. I think the hardest part was the beans. Seriously, if you can machine sew these in, I would highly recommend you do so. Hand sewing these things in was tough. After I got the beans sewed into the fingers, it was time to stuff them. I used Fursuit's 4-finger hand paw tutorial, and in there they recommend you do a ladder stitch to close the hole. This was the first time I had ever done a ladder stitch, and let me tell you, watching that hole close up while pulling on the thread was one of the most satisfying things I've ever seen. Now granted, it was a little tough for me, but I think that was because I was doing double thread method. You know, the thing where you thread the thread through the eye of the needle and then take the two ends and tie them together so it looks like there's two strings instead of just one. That's what I did, and I think that made the ladder stitch a little bit tougher. You can pull kind of hard to get it to close, but you don't want to pull too hard because you can break the thread. I learned that the hard way too. All in all, you can add a little force if you need to, but you have to keep in mind that there are limits. After I got all of the beans stuffed and closed up, it was time to sew the front and back together to form the glove. This part was really tricky. You have to make sure you sew everything closed, otherwise you'll end up with holes in the gloves. I'm currently dealing with this issue. If there's any advice I could give you for this part, it's to take your time. Make sure you sew everything together and make sure your seams are tight. Like I said, you can pull a little, but don't pull too hard because you'll break that thread. After that, it was time to turn them inside out. This is another part where you have to be careful. If you pull too hard on the fingers, you can rip them off. Or if you're too rough with the glove entirely, you can rip several seams. So you want to work slowly and again, take your time. The best advice I can give you for this process is to start down at the base of the glove, like where the hole is, and flip that inside out and just work your way up to the fingers. Again, just be gentle, take your time. It'll all come out eventually. All in all, I had a lot of fun making a fursuit. Would I do it again though? Probably not. This was not a cheap project at all. Granted, it's cheaper than commissioning a fursuit, but it still costs quite a bit of money to get all the materials to make the suit. And I already had an advantage because my fiance just happens to work at a company where they make EVA foam. Not everybody has that opportunity or has that kind of, connection, so it's going to end up probably costing you even more because you have to pay for that EVA foam. Maybe one day I'll give it another go and make another fursuit, but for now, I just want to enjoy the one I made and take a break from it all. I want to say this process probably took me 4 or 5 months to make it. Granted, a lot of that was just me procrastinating, but it was not a quick process at all. It took me literally 2 days to make the hand paws. Again, I decided to hand sew everything on the fursuit. I'm sure if you used a sewing machine, it would take you half the time to sew everything together. But I wanted to hand sew it. I wanted to do everything by myself. When it comes to making stuff, I don't really like asking people for help. I'd rather make something on my own and work on something on my own than ask somebody for help. So, again, if you used a sewing machine, it would take you a lot less time. It would take you a lot less time. But all in all, I think that I can walk away from this process and know that I did my best, be happy with the results, and maybe try again in the future, but who knows. Thank you guys for watching this. Please check out the description for all of my socials and the tutorials I followed. I stream on Twitch 5 days a week. The link for that is in the description as well. So, yeah, I'll see you later.